Welcome to Scares Grief Workshop. We do these each year because around this time of year, Mexican people celebrate Dia de los Muertos. A lot of tribes around here celebrate some sort of All Souls Day and cleanse the graves of their loved ones in the cemeteries, decorate them, honor their loved ones. And so we wanted to honor that during this time of year. Grief comes up, and sometimes it's important for us to talk about it, support each other, help each other navigate it, because it can be difficult. And so today, our SCARE staff here decided that we wanted to have a conversation and talk about some of the practices within our families, our communities, our cultures, in hopes that that can help you all think about practices that will be helpful to you as you navigate the loss of your loved ones. And so, okay, wait. All right, so then I'll do like a little segue about grief thing. So I think the first thing that's important for us to talk about is that there are actually a lot of myths about grief that go around, and some of them are not helpful. And one example of that is I think there are a lot of people that believe that there is an end point to grief, and that if we do, these practices and we heal at a certain point, we won't feel the pain anymore. And what I found is that's almost never true. Grief usually stays with us for our whole lives, because whoever we lost, whether it was our loved one, a family member, a friend, a community member, a pet, whoever we lost played a really, really, really special and irreplaceable role in our lives. And so that loss stays with us. We miss that person, we think of them. And a lot of times milestones in life can bring up grief in new ways. For example, I know a lot of people, when they lose a parent and then they have big milestones like graduations or a wedding or those type of really exciting moments, that can bring up a whole new wave of grief that parent isn't there with us to celebrate. And so what I found is grief tends to stay with us forever. And it's important for us to find a way to live alongside it and to carry it with us, and also be present with the love and the joy and the beautiful things that we also have in life. And it's not always easy. And that brings me to a metaphor that I've heard for grief that I think is helpful. You can think of grief as waves in the ocean. And sometimes when we just lost a loved one and we're standing in the ocean, a huge wave of grief can come over us and overwhelm us. And we feel like we're flailing, our feet aren't on the ground, we're just overwhelmed, it's painful, it's scary. And so, that's how it is usually at first. When we lose a close loved one, we just keep getting these huge waves of grief. And then after a while, the waves kind of get a little smaller, get a little farther apart. They're not quite as overwhelming. We're able to keep our feet on the ground, even though it's still hard, and we still get a lot of emotions about it. And then after a while, the waves get smaller and farther apart, and smaller and farther apart. So for me, that's a helpful metaphor. That is a way that I've experienced grief. Another myth that I wanted to mention that I think is important, that goes around a lot and a lot of people believe it, is the idea that there are 5 stages of grief and we go through them, and once we go through one of them, then we're finished, we go to another one. So you may have heard them. So they're denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And a lot of us have heard those steps and think, okay, I'm in denial right now. Okay, I've been through the denial part. Now I'm feeling angry. Now I'm going to move on to bargaining. And actually, that's not true. Those stages of grief were actually based on research done by a woman who was researching feelings of people that were facing their own mortality because they were terminally ill. And so those stages were relevant to the feelings that those people were going through as they faced their own mortality. And it's become this very pervasive myth that those stages apply to grief when we lose a loved one. And that's not the case. Grief can look a lot of different ways. Those stages that I just mentioned can definitely be relevant when we lose a loved one, and grief can look a lot of other ways too. So I think that was another important aspect. And something else I want to say too, a lot of times when we hear the word grief, we only think of the loss of a loved one. And actually, grief applies to a lot of areas of life, not just the loss of a loved one. For example, many parents, as their child goes from being a baby to a toddler to a child to a teenager, it can be hard because on one hand, it's exciting, your child is growing and learning and changing. And on the other hand, it's hard because your child's no longer a baby. You can't hold the child in your arms anymore and cuddle it in the same way like you used to. And so sometimes that's a real big sense of loss and change. And so grief can apply to a journey like that also, and so many other areas of life too. Losing a job, moving, grieving the life that we had in whatever other place we live. It can apply to many, many areas of life. And that brings me to another important point, is that we can experience collective grief, right? So sometimes it's not only me that's grieving something that's a loss that I'm going through, or a transformation or a change. For example, I went through this not long ago. Our family dog died, and we all really loved our dog, had been with our dog for so long, for years and years and years. So it was a huge loss for my family. And so that was collective grief that we went through together. And actually, we can go through collective grief on bigger and bigger levels. It's not only just with our family. And so sometimes a whole city can go through collective grief. For example, if there's a shooting and it's very tragic and very violent and it affects a lot of people, like a mass shooting, that can be an example of collective grief that a whole city or a whole town can go through together. And one that a lot of us have been going through the last few years, there's been a lot of collective grief about the fact that we have been navigating a global pandemic. And so we lost the way that we used to live without any COVID precautions. We didn't have to think about it. We could have huge gatherings. We didn't think about masks, And once COVID hit, a lot of things changed. And so we were grieving the way that we used to live. Also, of course, a lot of us lost loved ones to COVID, including myself. I lost a great uncle that I love very dearly. And so that's another example of how we're going through collective grief together due to the pandemic. And so we're going to be talking more about some of these things. And our hopes today for this workshop are that if we share some of our experiences and some of the ways that we take care of each other and take care of ourselves, that it can spark and inspire some ideas for you all about ways to take care of yourselves, navigate grief, take care of each other. And so, hopefully y'all will get a lot out of this workshop today. And so, as we're talking, we're going to be working on these tissue paper flowers here. It's really a neat thing because in a lot of different cultures, including mine, I'm Chicana, or also I can identify as Mexican also. We make tissue paper flowers to put on Dia de los Muertos altars. And so we thought that this would be a beautiful thing to work on today during our conversation, and hopefully inspire you all. If you're interested in doing crafty things, you can make some tissue paper flowers. The materials are so low cost and easy to get at any craft store, colored tissue paper, pipe cleaners, and they come out pretty, and you can decorate an altar or your loved one's grave. You can put them in your room. There's a lot of things you can do with them. You can make them different sizes. So we thought this would be an appropriate activity during our conversation about grief. And so thank you for being here. It means a lot to us. Thank you for being part of the SCARE community. And with that, I will introduce myself, and then we'll go around and each do a brief introduction. So my name is Andina. I'm a counselor here at SCARE. I've been here for 9 years. It's been an absolute honor to work in this community. I really, really, really love it. Just earlier today, I ran into a participant I hadn't seen in years, and it just was, I just feel so much joy even from just having seen that person, and they're doing really well right now. So I'm just really grateful that I've been able to see the changes in this community and people make positive, healthy changes in their lives. And so, yeah, I'm happy to be a counselor. And with that, I will go ahead and pass it to Kenz, who is also in our counseling department as our social worker / counselor, so helping people with resources and also doing therapeutic services. And Kenz has been with us for a couple months. We're really happy to have you here. Thank you for all you're doing for our participants, and take it away.
Thanks, Andina. I appreciate the introduction. Like Andina said, my name is Kenz. I am a social work intern here, and I'm doing the Master's of Social Work program at San Diego State University. So I actually just moved here from Illinois, and I feel really grateful to be, kind of becoming a part of the community here in San Diego and learning about everyone and the things that are most important to them and how we can best support through resources and other therapeutic services that we offer. Throw it over to Tekka.
Thank you. So my name is Tekka. I've been here at SCARE probably about 2.5 years now, but I used to be a participant here with Tribal TANF many years ago. So I am very familiar with SCARE and the program and a lot of the staff that are here, so it's nice seeing it from a different side. But I am the adult programs coordinator here, and I like being here, and I just hope that I can give some good information, and I'm going to pass it on to Michelle.
Thanks, Tekka.
My name is Michelle O'Quinn. I'm the job developer for SCARE. I've spent 20 years working with low income and homeless families and families transitioning from homelessness. I've been with SCARE for 2 years? Yeah, about 2 years. And I'm happy to work with the community and to bring everything that I've learned from the past 20 years here to SCARE and to the Native community.
Thank you. Yeah, it's beautiful to hear y'all's introductions and just be reminded how awesome everybody is that works here. So we wanted to start by just honoring the fact that we've all lost loved ones like most people have. And so for today, we are honoring them and holding their energies close to us and their spirits close to us. And so we each wanted to name somebody that we've lost that is now in the spirit world, yet we still love them dearly. And I think of them around this time of year. I think of them all the time. But the person that I want to honor today is, I call her my spirit sister. You could also call her my best friend. Her name is Raquel Levitan Dillon. I lost her about 6 years ago. And we were friends since I was 12, since we were about 12 years old. So she played a very, very, very special role in my life journey, and I am so grateful for her. And she's with me every day. And I wanted to honor her by putting this flower in our basket that represents our loved ones that we hold close to us. You want to share yours, Ken?
Yeah, thank you, Andina. So today, as we're talking about grief and really talking about the ways that we can support ourselves and support each other, I'm thinking of my grandfather, who I lost I think it was about 3 years ago. It's funny sometimes when you lose someone how time can seem to change and not move in the same way. And so I'm thinking about my grandpa, Paul Eckstein. He was a really big part of my life. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents growing up. And losing him was one of the hardest things that I had experienced up until that point. And so I think about him often, and today I'd like to honor him while we talk.
So this reminds me, in my community, in the Chicano community, a lot of times when we think of a lost loved one and how we want to honor them, we have a practice for that. Can you repeat your grandpa's name?
Paul Eckstein.
Okay, so Paul Eckstein, presente! Becca, you want to share yours?
Yeah, so I'm actually placing this flower in honor of both my grandparents that I lost 6 years ago, a month of each other. Arlene and Bobo Galvin, they were really big in the community, and they've done a lot, and they were our rock of our family, so I'm placing this in here for them.
Arlene and Bobo Galvin, presente!
For me, I lost my tia Panchi in December. She passed away from COVID. But she was always there, like, for me and my girls. And then she's kind of like my Jiminy Cricket, because, like, if I say something wrong or, like, she'll go, oh, mija. And so sometimes when I know I'm just like, ugh, and I can hear her, like, you know, basically calm that down. So I put the flower.
Thank you. Tia Panchi, presente! Thank you all. This is beautiful. So we can kind of get started working on our flowers, and we have some discussion topics that we thought would be helpful for today. And so we wanted to start with grief practices and rituals that we practice either on our own or with our family, with our partner, whoever. And then also it could be practices that happen in our community, kind of like the one that I just mentioned about if we're wanting to honor somebody in the spirit world, we say their name and we say presente. It's really powerful when you have a huge room of people that do it. It's awesome. And so our community or our tribe. So yeah, we just wanted to talk a little bit more about that. So I guess I could start. So I'm thinking about how on my Mexican side of the family, on my dad's side, we historically did not celebrate Dia de los Muertos since I was a baby. Yet I always felt a really big draw to Dia de los Muertos. It's hard to explain. It's like a spiritual connection. I'm not sure even how to explain it. But I've always really, really loved it and collected the little nichos. I don't know if you've seen the little diorama boxes for Dia de los Muertos with the skeletons doing different activities that can represent our loved ones who did those same activities in life. So I always collected those. I always loved Dia de los Muertos, would go to the events. And then I decided, my family's Mexican, we have my abuelo and abuela and different loved ones in the spirit world that I really wanted to honor. And so I thought, you know, traditions evolve and change all the time. And so who's stopping me from starting a tradition of celebrating Dia de los Muertos with my family, even though it wasn't a historical thing that we did since I was a baby? They didn't do that with their parents. It just wasn't a thing in our family, although there are a lot of Mexican people that do. And so I actually I organized Dia de los Muertos events for my family starting a few years ago. And it was a risk. I wasn't sure how it was going to go or if my family was going to like it. And we did it. I think we've done 2 so far. So 2 years ago we did one and it went really well. We built an altar together. We remembered my abuela and abuelo, in English would be grandmother and grandfather. And we talked about my Tío Nacho, who's in the spirit world. We talked about a lot of people we love that we've lost. And it was really powerful and really beautiful. And we felt so connected to each other afterwards. So I was so happy, and we decided to make it an annual event. And so we did it again last year, and even more family members came, and everyone got to talk about some of their loved ones that they had lost. And once again, it went super well. We built a collective altar, and I was just so spiritually nourished and happy from it. So we decided this is going to be an ongoing thing every year, and we're going to do it coming in a week or 2 here. And so that's one of the grief practices that I help start in my family. And one reason I wanted to mention that is because I think sometimes we feel a loss or an emptiness, like wanting to do something with our family, but not, or our community, our partner, whoever it is, but not feeling sure what or how or why. So I just wanted to say it's okay to start a new tradition if that's something that your heart, your spirit is calling you to do. And so with that, I'll pass it over to whoever would like to share next about practices.
I could share a little bit about a couple of different things that we do in my community. So we don't always, when I think of my culture and my community, I don't always think of the same like big traditional things that we may have to be able to pull from. I don't always view it as a very rich culture. And so I have been reflecting a lot though on different ways that we honor those people that we love in our life. And one of the things of when someone passes, we often will light a candle and burn that candle for the person in their honor while in prayer, or like when connecting with your spirituality and the Creator, or however you view your spirituality. And so we would light a candle and say, and maybe set an intention in that loved one's name. So like I had mentioned my grandpa earlier, so maybe lighting a candle for my grandpa and then setting the intention that I want to honor him through my connection with the Creator today. And so that's one way that we try to connect ourselves and still remember our loved ones while continuing on with life and moving forward.
Beautiful, thank you.
I can share. So something that my family does is we grew up, my grandparents were big in the Catholic community. So we grew up with things that kind of went around that. So we, had church service. And so we would do the rosary, just kind of go down that path, have family gatherings. Everybody would come over to the house if they were at the house, or to the hospital if they were in the hospital. And my grandma would make sure that, kind of went through those different steps and roles. And we would have, family togetherness. We would do, like have a funeral, everybody get together afterwards, and kind of kept it that way. My grandparents, my grandpa, who is Native, he didn't grow up on the reservation where we're from up north, so he, kind of took wing under my grandma's wing as to like what she did and how she handled things when it came to funerals or death in our family. So that's kind of like the route that we went in that way. So something that we've done.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Do you want to share, Michelle?
Yeah, so our families, Pascua and Yaqui, so like in our family, like we do the Day of the Dead, but, well, our culture does, but our altars are a bit different. So like for Dia de los Muertos, it's like 3 tiers. So, and for Yaquis, it's only 1, and it's basically like on sticks. And it's high because the spirit doesn't have a body.
Whoa.
Yeah, so you put it high, and then you put your candles, coffee, and then like some water. And then it's a prayer from October 1st all the way until November 2nd.
Wow.
So you're praying every night for your family. So when, so my aunt in my office, like of course I have like my aunt's picture up and things like that. And like we pray for her, every night until November 1st, and all their relatives that passed on.
Beautiful. Wow. For a whole month you pray every night.
Yeah, yeah. And then also to like, my kids already know that when I die, that they're supposed to plant a tree, and it's supposed to be a fruit tree. So then whatever fruit grows from that tree, that they're supposed to give it away, like in my name. So like that's another thing that we do too. So, for example, my cousin, when my tia died, she gave away things, you know, like keychains, fruit, food, all this stuff. It was like, just pray for my mom.
Wow. So that's a Yankee tradition also?
I think that's just us.
Okay.
I think that's just how we roll. So it's kind of like, you know, they've passed on, so they really can't do anything like good deeds for themselves. So like we do good deeds for them.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful. Thank you, everybody. So the next topic that we wanted to talk about in hopes that it could be helpful to you all is which practices are helpful for us as we navigate grief. And this is, I mean, the possibilities are infinite. And we've talked about some of the ones that we do with our families, our communities. And there's just so many different ways that we can comfort ourselves, honor our loved ones, and honor our grief. There's so many possibilities. And so I think I can start. For me, altars are huge. I find them super helpful. For me, it's a physical reminder of my love for that person, including even when, okay, for example, one of my best friends, sadly, her father died just a couple of weeks ago, and she lives out in Texas. And she texted me, and oh, my heart and my spirit are with her, even though unfortunately I'm physically far away from her. And so I built an altar for her father, and I love her father too, he's my friend too. And I built an altar for him, and I had a candle burning and a flower, and I had a couple different candles, and I wrote him a beautiful note to help him transition, and I took a photo of it, and I sent that to her. And so for me, that was really helpful to build that in honor of him, and also to show her how much he means to me and how much she means to me. And these days with cell phones and everything else, there's a lot of things we can do even when our loved ones are far away. And so, yeah, for me, altars are huge. Looking at photos is helpful, but sometimes it's really painful for me, so I have to be careful and like have boundaries with it in terms of how long I look at photos and things like that. And then also, for me, honoring my loved ones is really the biggest help for me. Like just, you know, thinking about them, bringing up their name, telling stories about them, how much they mean to me. I have my best friend Raquel that I mentioned that I put the flower in the basket for her. I'm still really close with her family and all her closest friends and her husband. And we get together regularly all the time and just talk about her, honor her, love on her, look at altars, look at photos. So for me, that's another big one is getting, if possible, it's not always possible, but if you can, getting together with other people that love that person, because that collective grief together helps me a lot. There's probably a bunch more, but I'm going to pass it to anyone else who wants to share about practices that are helpful to you.
I can go ahead. So something that I do, because I have a really hard time showing emotion, and so I usually, which could be good, could be bad, is I like to go by myself and feel things and get it out, because in my family I'm more strength than I am seeing anything else. So that kind of plays a part in me. But I also feel like what helps me especially is talking about it. So the more I talk about it, the more easier it is for me to discuss it more in front of other people, to where my emotions don't really come through. But I also have to learn, and it's something that I've worked on for a long time, is that it's okay to show emotions, because I don't want my children to grow up seeing me one way and think that this is the way that it has to go. So I do look at pictures, I talk about things with my kids. We do have a shelf in our home that has pictures, kind of like an altar, pictures or the in-memory cards of specific loved ones that we've lost throughout our time, or there's something like within our house that may have been gifted to us from that person, but we try to talk about it more just so that it becomes that conversation. And myself, like me and my daughters, we have conversations about my grandparents or just people that have passed throughout time, or I'll tell them memory stories of funny things that my grandpa used to do, or my grandma was more of like a strict person, so the things that she did, and then my grandpa would be in the background making faces or doing things like that, and just they're opposites, but just talking about it and laughing about it and bringing up those memories, and then it brings up conversation with other people who have different memories that I may have not have known. Sometimes I'll find a video that will pop up on like memories on social media of like my grandpa's voice. So like I'll play that over and over just to get that feeling.
Yeah.
But yeah, so those are things that I do that kind of help me out.
Love those. Actually, thank you, Tucka, for everything you shared, and it reminds me of something I think that's so important for us to touch on today, which is a lot of our families learned that crying is not something to do in front of others, and a lot of times, our grandparents' generation, our parents' generation may have passed that down to us. And a lot of us have that idea that we have to be strong, and strong means not crying in front of people, because when there's something sad going on, if you can be like the Rock and not crying, that's the most helpful thing. And I understand it. A lot of our grandparents' generations went through really painful things, depending what community that we're from. So sometimes they didn't have safe places to express emotions and cry, and that's why that gets passed down to us. And a lot of times that can end up being harmful in some ways, because crying is a super important part of being human. It's literally cleansing. It literally relieves stress. I mean, you can measure people's, I'm not a doctor, but you can measure people's like heart rates, or I don't know what, and find that when somebody cries, it lowers stress. And so crying is actually really important, and I also understand that we need to find safe spaces to do so, right? And so I believe that if we can do our best to unlearn that myth that crying in front of people is not helpful, or it's weak, or it's not okay, or whatever, and we can show that crying is okay, that is super helpful, because we all need to cry sometimes. And if we don't, some people, like, I have a friend who told me that he didn't cry for like 5 years, and that can be really, really harmful to a person. It builds up stress and grief in the body. And so yeah, I just thank you for bringing that up, Tekka, because I think that's something a lot of our families struggle with. And I just want to say it's a human need to cry. And so if we can model that for our children, that it's okay to cry, and that's part of grief, that's part of life, that's part of pain, that helps our kids feel safer to be able to cry themselves, right?
Yeah, because you're teaching them to be a safe space. Because it's like one thing to say, well, you need to be in a safe space, but then also people are a space themselves in general. So you need to surround yourself with people that are a safe space. And if you're expressing yourself and crying and things like, it's like you're showing that you too are a safe space in this emotion.
Love it. Yeah, exactly.
I really appreciate that perspective, and what you were thinking, Tekka, made me think that sometimes for myself, I need to sit alone with my grief. Sometimes I need to sit and have a quiet area where I just feel that I can be fully within myself and in my body and feel my grief in my body. And sometimes I like to do that privately, to just be able to sit with myself and feel where am I feeling the grief? Is it in my chest? Is it, where in my body is it? And just to acknowledge that I am feeling grief, because sometimes we want to push it away. Sometimes we want to say, I am okay, I'm fine, I can handle this. and you can handle it and also let yourself feel it, right? Like, I think it's really important to be able to accept our feelings and accept, like, I do feel this way, and maybe I don't like it, maybe I want my grief to shift, but it's still happening in my body. And then when we're able to acknowledge it and sit with it, I often find that my grief shifts, that it finds different ways of, you know, that I live with it differently once I'm able to take it in and feel it. And sometimes I want to be like with my partner when I'm feeling grief. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I want input, right? I think it's important for us to think about telling people what we need. So maybe I don't want to be alone, but I'm gonna say, I don't really want advice right now, or I don't really want to talk. I just want to sit and hold your hand. I just want to feel the comfort of you being next to me while I feel this feeling, but I don't want to talk about it. And I think that's okay too. And it can feel kind of uncomfortable to ask for what you need, because a lot of us are
Not talking.
yeah, are told, or told explicitly not to
Right.
voice your needs.
Right.
And so being able to kind of like find those people in your life that you really trust and be able to tell them what you need has been one of the most transformative experiences for me with grief.
And I mean, even just being there, like how you had mentioned, like, I need you here, hold my hand, but don't say anything, that's still another form of you sitting with it inside yourself, like alone, but you're not alone, but you are, because you're internalizing it on your own. So, you know, like, being alone with it can mean multiple different ways, not just actually going someplace and really just being by yourself.
That's a great point. Really good point. Yeah, and thank you for that, Kens. It's so important, and a lot of us either weren't taught how to express our needs or never even had a safe place to even learn how to identify what we need, much less express it. So a lot of us struggle with that. I've been a counselor 9 years. I struggle with it sometimes. And it's a practice, and so the more you do it, the better you get at it. And at first, expressing a need to somebody, will you please hold my hand, I'm grieving right now, that might feel awkward, scary, vulnerable, and it is a risk. And I hope that you have safe people in your life, or if you don't right now, I hope someday that you can find healthy, safe people in your life where you can do that with. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes if you have that safe, healthy relationship. So, yeah, I think that's really important.
And one other thing I wanted to mention off of that, of thinking about ways to kind of be in tune with ourselves and our bodies. So sometimes when we're feeling grief or any really big feeling, it can feel too overwhelming to just be sitting with it. So maybe like what I like to do is go and be in nature. So if I'm having a really hard time, and like Andina was saying earlier, maybe those waves are too big and they're too powerful, and just sitting by myself or even sitting next to someone, I feel restless or I feel like I can't sit with that feeling. And so I like to go and connect with nature and reflect on what I'm feeling and kind of see how my environment, like going and hiking or being in the ocean, helps me to process my grief and helps me to process my feelings. And sometimes for me, it really just helps me connect more with that person I've lost, because a lot of my life was spent in nature with the people I love. And so being able to connect in that way reminds me of them and reminds me of what they taught me and like how to move forward with my life.
Beautiful. Michelle, did you want to share which practices are especially helpful to you?
So for me, it was just sharing stories. I think the more that I told them, I think the more it helped me to accept like what happened and to kind of like walk into accepting that, you know, that she's gone. And then also too, because we're always giving, you know, like, well, my family, we're always giving things away, like in their name or you know, something like that. So it's, that's helpful as well. But then also too, I know that, like, especially when it happens, there's a lot of noise and a lot of chatter, especially like with people in their own nervous way trying to deal with the grief themselves. And so like to quiet my mind so I can deal with my own stuff and process my own feelings. Like I'll learn how to do something new, not because I want to learn it, but just because you have to focus, you have to concentrate, and so that kind of like shuts everything off. And then like once everything's shut off, then it's like you can kind of process things. It's really weird, but that's just me. But it's a way to get to that space where it's quiet, and then you can kind of process what you're going through without feeling or listening to anyone else's noise. Not that I don't appreciate their noise, but sometimes I need to hear my own. Yeah.
That's a really good point, because a lot of us are living fast-paced lives. We gotta work, we have kids, we gotta pay the bills, we gotta take care of the elders in our family. There's just so much going on for most of us. And so sometimes it can be hard to just slow down and just process your own grief or your own feelings. And so, you know, even me, like I live a pretty fast-paced life. I have people I take care of, I work. And so sometimes I wish I could take a few days off and just grieve and honor Raquel, honor my loved ones, and that's not always possible. So I try to find ways that are possible. Take a half hour in the evening to go sit by the altar and think about her. Or, you know, sometimes we can take just a few minutes and just kind of connect with that person's spirit and really, you know, hold them close to us. There's different things we can do even when we're living fast-paced lives. So I'm glad you said that, thank you. So the next question, we kind of already covered this, but in case anybody wants to add anything else, how do you take care of yourself when you're grieving? It can be hard. It can be a hard thing to do. Like I said, I struggle with it because I live a fast-paced life. And so I would say similar to what we've already been talking about, for me, going to nature is huge. I'm glad you brought that up, Ken. And in fact, my best friend Raquel that I just mentioned, her death anniversary was just 2 days ago. And so a really good friend and I went to the ocean and we threw flowers in the ocean and we talked about her and we honored her. And so for me, nature is a big one. So I'm glad you brought that up, Ken. But we did cover it, but does anyone want to add anything else about how you take care of yourself?
I think one really interesting thing to think about is when you were talking about grief earlier and the different kinds of grief, there's also something called ambiguous loss. And ambiguous loss is, you could kind of think about it like maybe there was some big shift or transition, or maybe you really thought something was going to turn out one way and then it didn't, or maybe you were holding on to this vision, this thing that you felt was going to be transformational for your life and it just didn't work out like that. Or maybe there was someone in your life and you viewed them one way and then something happened and it completely changed your idea of who they were, and you're really grieving that thing that you thought, right? You're really grieving whatever that was that shifted for you. And I think when thinking about taking care of myself with something like ambiguous loss, it can be hard because you can't exactly name it. You can't always say, this is why I'm feeling grief, or I'm missing this person, or there's some way that I want to connect that this thing made me feel a certain way and I want to connect like that. Like, it's really difficult. You can't always put a name to grief. And how are you supposed to move on when you can't name something? And so what I like to do, especially if I'm feeling some kind of ambiguous loss, and I don't know exactly what it is that I'm grieving, but I can feel it, you know when you can feel it. And I like to sit, my biggest thing is I like to sit in the morning. I'll get up early so I can make a cup of coffee and drink out of this mug that is from my grandma's.
Aww.
So my grandma and I used to drink coffee together at her kitchen table in the morning after I'd help her get ready for the day. and we would always sit and have these little mugs, and I brought one with me when I moved because I knew that I was gonna miss that part of my life and being able to spend that time with her. And so I'll wake up early and do something nice for myself, which is just making that cup of coffee and having those intentional moments to myself with my coffee and my grandma's cup, and just really be present. So finding something that feels good to you, even if it doesn't seem like a big thing, and sitting in that moment and being able to feel present. And I really like to think about, like, how does the coffee smell? What does it taste like? What am I seeing when I'm like kind of relaxing and clearing my mind? Like, what do I notice about my environment around me? Maybe it's that my cat is coming and like rubbing up against my leg or whatever, you know, but like really being present in those moments. And that helps me kind of move forward, even if I'm having this grief that I don't know exactly what's happening or why.
Mhm. Thank you. And that's a good example of something you can do even when you live a fast-paced life.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a beautiful one. Anyone else want to add anything?
Well,
Good
like
on that one?
just to piggyback off of her,
Uh-huh.
like when I explain it to my daughter, it's like because it's like for us older people, stay present, be in the moment. And
Yes.
she's like, well, what is that? So, so I tell them like, you have to focus on what is, not what shoulda, coulda, woulda, if, you know, those are like poisonous words. So we talk about what is happening. So what is going on? What can you see? Like what is happening right
Love
now?
it.
Not what do you think is going to happen. Because if you're thinking about what's going to happen, you're in the future, you're not in the present. And if you think about like what happened, then you're in the past and you're not in the present. So like what is happening? So then that kind of like calms them down a little bit.
I love that.
Yeah.
You want to be our new kids counselor? Thank you. That's a good one. Before I forget, Kenz, I'm glad you brought up ambiguous loss because it made me think of something. A lot of times when we have loved ones that struggle with addiction, alcoholism, substance use, that is a really powerful form of grief because a lot of times we're grieving that person's safety, we're grieving who they could be, their potential, we're grieving who they used to be before the addiction really took over their lives. And so that's a really big form of ambiguous grief that a lot of us go through. And it's ambiguous because the person didn't die, they're still here, they're still in our lives. And so it's like we want to connect with them and it's very hard to because the addiction has taken over their lives. So yeah, I think that's real important to name because a lot of us go through that. A lot
And
of
then
us.
parents also go through it when they find out that their child may have some sort of mental illness, whether
That's a
it be
great
like
point.
autism or something else. They go through the same thing.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Yep, yeah, there's a lot of examples. All right, so moving into collective grief, and then we'll wrap up. So how do our families, and we talked about this some too, but we can just kind of add anything else we think of, but how do our families and communities take care of each other when we are experiencing collective grief? And then going off of that, is there anything that we wish was different in the ways that we take care of each other when it comes to collective grief? And I guess I'll go first. I will say that I mentioned the Dia de los Muertos gathering, so that's one way that our family takes care of each other. Memorials, I mean, most of us have a memorial after a loved one is lost, and that's a really powerful way of taking care of each other during collective grief, stepping up, organizing a memorial. A lot of us bring food to the person who was very close to the loved one that was lost, whether it was a spouse, parent, kid, whoever it was. We bring food to that person. Our family does that too. And so there's a lot of different ways that we can take care of each other during collective grief. And I love the ones you brought up, Michelle, of giving things, doing good deeds for others in that person's name. That's a really good way to take care of each other during collective grief. And so, yeah, there's a lot of possibilities. By the way, one important thing. So a lot of us, when somebody's grieving, we say, please let me know if there's anything you need. And we have really good intentions when we say that, and most of the time we mean it, And a lot of the times people don't find that the most helpful approach. Because when we're in the middle of grief, it can be so overwhelming that we're just trying to survive day to day. We're just trying to drink water, get some sleep, eat some food, breathe. Like, it's just so hard to do anything beyond that. And so when someone says, tell me what you need, it's like, I don't even know what I need. I don't have the brain space to delegate and organize and think of all that. So a lot of times it's helpful to say to the person that's really grieving and really in it, hey, I can pick up your kids for the day, I can do your dishes, I can clean your house, I can bring you food, and you could text them something like that, and then just say, you don't have to respond if you don't want to. That's another thing that's helpful, not pressuring people to respond because maybe they don't have the energy. And then just say, please let me know if one of these things would be helpful. Another thing you can do is go on a walk with the person, because again, even physically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, research shows that movement is very helpful when it comes to stress and grief. And so a lot of times asking the person, hey, do you want to go on a walk somewhere pretty together? That can be a really helpful thing. So there's a lot of ways we can take care of each other. And with that, I will pass it to anyone who may have another idea that I haven't mentioned.
Well, one thing that you're making me think of is in my family, we're really big on kind of like putting together a photo collage, but we print it out. So it's not just like the digital, you know, which can be really nice too if you like that. But we really like to print out a bunch of photos of the loved one or all of us together or whatever it is, like any memories that make us think of this person, and make boards with just all kinds of photos and photos from when they were young and, you know, just all different kinds. And so that's been a really healing practice for me of viewing those photos and viewing all of that connection and togetherness, and then being surrounded by all of these other people in my family who also loved them, and us being able to talk, you know, like the photos spark memories. And you think about, and for us, it's been a way of really helping people to be open and to be able to cry together while we're grieving, because sometimes if you have something shared that you can view, it kind of like is that, I don't want to say conversation starter, but you know, it's that thing that kind of bridges the gap where you can focus on it together and just let your emotions flow. And so that's been really nice. And one thing I wanted to mention off of that is earlier today we had asked a participant what that comes to SCARE, like what they would like to see from a workshop like this, or like advice that they would like to get while grieving. And they mentioned that they would say, like, always take more photos, like always be more present and like capture those moments with your loved ones while you're with them. Because then they said that they would like to look back on those things. And from experiences they had where they didn't have the photos, they just think, you know, like, why didn't I take the photo? And so having your, you know, taking photos if you can, and being engaged and really capturing those memories so you can look back on them.
I think that's something that, like, with the whole new or like, a lot of people, all they have are cell phones these days. They don't have cameras where they go to the store and print out pictures the way that we used to do. And so it turns into this like, oh, do I have those pictures on my phone still? Or if something happens and your phone goes haywire and you didn't save it to like a drive somewhere or something, like you lose pictures. So, you know, kind of like going off of that whole thing of the pictures is they're really important to have, and they're also really important to find a safe place to put them. So if they are on your phone and that's your only way of having them, try to find some type of like place that you can store them digitally online. So like a photo album, or like the iPhones have like the iCloud Drive, or Google Photos, or try to just take that time to go print out those pictures and have them, because you know, you never know when you're going to remember something and then be like, oh, I have a picture from that, and then you can never find the picture again. But it's like, I have a big tub that I keep tons of pictures in from when I used to have a camera.
Mhm.
And then I find as the years go on, I'm printing less and less.
Mhm.
And so like, you know, just going off of that whole thing of like taking pictures, it is really important to have those memories, but it's also important to find a way of saving
That's a
them
great point.
so that you always have them, or you know where they're gonna be if something were to ever happen.
Yeah. External hard drive is another idea.
Yeah.
Thank you, that's a good point. You wanna say anything, Michelle? Okay. I just wanna say too about like, is there anything we wish was different when it comes to collective grief? I'm really grateful for this space and this workshop and us talking about this right now, because I've already learned so much, and I feel really inspired about other ways that I can take care of myself and other loved ones when we're going through grief. And so one thought I have is I just wish that we had more spaces to just get together and talk about it, not only with the people that are already in our lives, but maybe with coworkers like this, or you know, with other families that go to your kids' school or whatever, because a lot of the times talking about it is just helpful and feeling supported and feeling understood. And then also, again, just feeling inspired by these ideas. Like, I love the thing of doing good deeds for other people, and I try to do that, but now I feel even more inspired, like, oh, what are more ways that I can do that? And so, so I think that's really important. And I remember one time I read online, someone had an idea of having community spaces that were dedicated to grief and honoring loved ones. And if you felt like going and being in community and doing that, you could go there and have these conversations or build an altar or do whatever you needed to do. And I really loved that idea. So that's something that I wish. There's a lot of things I wish could be different when it comes to collective grief, but that's a big one. And I don't know if y'all have ideas too.
Yeah, I really wish that there was more space for silence when it comes to collective grief. I feel that sometimes when we're all grieving something, maybe, you know, there feels this like pressure to be talking or to like be naming it or to be, you know, like reminiscing. And I wish there was more space to just sit with each other in silence and sit with the feeling and feel it in our bodies and connect in that way. Because for myself, like you were saying earlier, Michelle, like sometimes I need quiet to be able to process, and I still want to be with someone, I still want to be sharing the moment, but I wish that people didn't always feel the need to say, is there anything I can do for you? Can I get you anything? Because the most powerful thing for me is to just have someone sit with me and share that hard moment and not try to put it into words, because oftentimes I can't fully put my grief into words, and it feels like it detracts from it. It feels like it takes away from how profound it is when I'm constantly being urged to voice it.
That's a great point.
So sometimes I just wish there was more space for silence, and that people knew that we could just sit together quietly.
Mhm.
Definitely. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I wish there was more conversation about it, just because, like, other people have their own ways of dealing with grief, and then they think that you're supposed to be able to deal with your grief in the same way, or that because you're grieving, your presence make them feel uncomfortable because you're grieving, and it's just like, respect my grief and respect my space. But I think there needs to be more conversation about it, so it's more competency around the subject, because my way of grieving and how deep I feel may not be as deep as how you feel.
Yeah.
And so just because things might be a little superficial and you can get over it really fast, doesn't mean that I
Right.
can, or that I should be pushed to.
Right.
Especially if it comes into the same household where you grieve a certain way and your partner grieves a different way, and how that can be, you know, its own sense of grief of, okay, I'm this way and they're this way, but if I go at them the way that I grieve, then that could cause them to have some type of flashback, and vice versa. So it's kind of finding like a common ground too of, you know, a mixture of the silence or that, just that physical presence of being there, but then also in that communicative state of, how can I support them without overly doing it? So it's, you know, it's another way of finding what works best, like within your home, and kind of learning more, like you had said, you learned a lot just over conversations. Having these types of conversations help you understand how other people grieve, and then that opens your knowledge of, okay, well, you know, that gives me insight of those around me of like, well, they're not taking it as hard as I am, but you don't know what they're internalizing. And because their grief process is different, or their way of grieving is different. So, you know, it kind of goes a mixture of both, that, you know, it all plays hand in hand.
Yeah, and that brings up an important point. A lot of times when we're in pain and we're grieving, we might not even realize it, but we start kind of taking it out on the other people around us. And sometimes they're grieving too. So then it creates problems because we're all grieving, and now we're in conflict and we're taking things out on each other. And sometimes people do that of judging how each other grieves. And most of the time that's not a helpful thing. And it's helpful to just remind ourselves that grief can look a lot of different ways. And because it looks one way for me, it doesn't mean it has to look that way for my partner or whoever it is. And so, yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, because that is a common issue. So we are at that point of time to wrap up, and so I'm just, again, really grateful for this conversation, and I just wanted to kind of offer, if anybody has closing words. And one idea is there something that you're going to take away from this conversation, something that stood out that felt really helpful, or anything else that you want to say in closing?
I would just say is just the fact that we have a conversation on it, just because it can be seen as one of those things you don't discuss, or even how you had mentioned earlier, Indina, that there's multiple different ways of grief. It's not just losing somebody by them passing. It could be from substance abuse, or grieving a relationship, or, you know, it's in different magnitudes. So that's something that, you know, is really insightful and good, as, you know, just kind of like touching on grief as a whole.
Yeah, because when you think about it, the only constant in life is change. Things are constantly changing, right? And so we're constantly losing the way things used to be in one way or another. So some people, I remember in my grad program, somebody said we're always grieving on some level because things are always changing. So yeah, thank you. Does anyone else want to share closing words?
Yeah, I think my big takeaway from this conversation is I feel really lucky to have been able to share this space with you all and learn about how you know, experience grief. And my biggest takeaway would be that if we all were to sit together when we could and share space like this, that we could learn so much about ourselves from listening to others, and about each other, and how we could better support each other. And so if I'm ever feeling like, man, I don't really know what to do, maybe I'll just ask someone, would you be willing to have like a conversation and just share some space with me? Can we talk about it?
Thank you. Do you want to share anything, Michelle?
No, I'm just agreeing that we should just talk about it more. It just needs to be,
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you everybody so much for being here and for being part of this workshop. We hope you got a lot out of it. We hope it's helpful in ideas of how to take care of yourself and your loved ones when you're grieving. You're welcome to contact us with any questions. We have our counseling department here. So if anybody is struggling and needs some counseling, so a safe space of where to talk, you're welcome to contact SCARE and we'll get you hooked up with a counselor. Thank you so much. It's been an honor to be with you. Thank you all. I'm really grateful for you all. I think this has been a really beautiful and helpful conversation. And thank you, Atley, for recording. And I guess as our final thing, we can hold up our flowers that we made. Mine's Halloween colors. Yay. Beautiful. Thank you, everybody.